It is Thursday, the 20th of July, 2023. And an absurd quotation hit us this evening, forcing this unusual start to our news bulletin and by extension, our weekly show, The News Gang. Earlier today, a senator posed a tweet which, with utmost embarrassment, we hereby quote. He says, there is nothing unusual about being arrested by police if you have not committed any crime. My advice when arrested by police, you need 3 things: heavy eating, cash bail or a good lawyer, warm clothing, and be humble to the police. End of quote.
In ordinary times, this would not be a quote worth repeating. But the narrow gap between its absurd suggestion and the reality literally shocks us into reality. The tweet is not a drill, it is real. Earlier today, just past 5 p.m. and therefore past the official working hours in Kenya, 7 persons, including a member of parliament, arrested in connection with the opposition anti-government protests, were arraigned. For a start, they looked warmly dressed if the standards of the tweet are anything to go by.
Who would have wished to use the tweet as some source of humor, were it not for the real circumstances of our nation that it speaks to. The 7 suspects are among the lucky few. They are warm and they have been produced before a court of law, but past working hours and nearly 3 days after they were arrested. And that is one of the many red flags we raise tonight.
For those familiar with the country's criminal justice system in the 80s and the 90s, after hours was the preferred hour of duty by the then notorious and powerful Deputy Public Prosecutor, especially in prosecuting cases of a political nature. Not to alarm you unnecessarily, it's just that small things really matter. The law requires production of suspects before a court of law within 24 hours. But this was not the case today, and it wasn't the case today. Not to alarm you again, there was a time it actually worked that way.
And we close that matter of the tweet and leave the case to where it is, the courtroom. We move on now to our second red flag of the night: the conduct, attitude, and demeanor of the National Police Service as manifested in recent weeks of anti-government protests by the opposition. The protests had been declared illegal by the government, and this occasioned police action to ensure that no such protests took place. Well and good. But some images left us with more questions than answers. This clip is hard to watch. We advise viewer discretion.
This clip without doubt offends the sensibilities of all human beings, let alone Kenyans. Why this level of brutality? Why the cruelty? And why such excessive force on a person, even if a potential offender that is lying on the ground, literally on the verge of death?
And which laws allow the police to exhibit such levels of barbaric acts, even if to enforce a ban on protests? We found this next clip equally disturbing.
Unakunulia mtoto wangu ndio lisa yamefeli. Unaumiza watoto wewe. Amepiga watoto kiaga sio. Yo. Unapiga mtoto wangu ndio kiaga.
From this clip, it is evident that protesters too have a story to tell. that protester is a father. He is a slum dweller, and he says that his child has fainted from tear gas fumes. And he says he came to ask why the police are firing tear gas at their homes.
Now, that man certainly owes his life to that video clip. His whole story is on tape. He was unarmed, bare hands, and in sandals. Had he been shot dead, narratives would have been spun about how he was armed and dangerous, alingoa reli, he was looting, and anything else that would fit that official narrative about protecting lives and property.
Just out of the Wednesday protests, many more illustrations emerged that put to question the conduct, not of protesters, but of the police. Some of these instances were almost amusing, if not for the painful end for the victims.
What's in your hand?
My hand? The message in your platter. What's that?
Add some logo to dog.
There's no problem.
Mwambie pite. Illegal demonstration.
Now, it will be very interesting to see what offense the peaceful young man will be charged with. And we said this in light of similar arrests carried out during the Sabasaba protest recently, in which the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions told the court they were not going to prefer any criminal charges on 73 persons who had been arrested. All the 73 were set free.
Which brings us to the substantive questions around the violation of the Constitution by the police. For reasons that can only be attributed to politics, the police have seemingly been having their own unique interpretation of Article 37 of the Constitution, which grants every Kenyan the right to peaceably and unarmed to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions to public authorities. On this constitutional sword, some of the charges against peaceful protesters have been falling in court.
13 years into the implementation of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, recent political events return a negative appraisal of the interpretation of the rights of Kenyans with regard to Article 37. The right to assemble remains subject to backdoor restrictions that bear the echoes of the past, when freedom of expression and freedom of speech were considered a threat to national wellness. The delay in this transition has partly been occasioned by the violent conduct of some of the protesters, and secondly and consequentially by the equally violent conduct of some members of the National Police Service.
Which is why tonight we beg the indulgence of the National Police Service. Ladies and gentlemen in uniform, you can help the country's journey to political maturity by first and foremost setting an example in adherence to the Constitution and to the law.
And indeed, the Constitution of Kenya 2010 is a liberating document, not just for civil liberties, but also for the National Police Service, which the Constitution sought to liberate from the yoke of political patronage. Article 245 of the Constitution envisages an independent National Police Service capable of investigating offences and enforcing the law against any particular person or persons in total freedom from many external instructions.
Now we know this may sound idealistic, but it is actually in the text of our Constitution of Kenya 2010. Our police service is on paper among the most enabled institutions to carry out duties independently, professionally, and in a just and fair manner. Which is why tonight, the National Police Service must retreat to reflect on its actions or actions of some of its members.
Some of that reflection should be about the basics. The video clips making rounds depicting policemen using excessive force and generally behaving badly should be a good starting point. And of course the question, when should a policeman take away the life of a fellow Kenyan?
That is a pertinent question, as the latest statistics indicate that since March this year, over 30 Kenyans have died as a result of police action. The other question is, would all the 30 deaths be justified, even in the name of protecting lives and property? Which deaths include children?
A night of many questions and a night of deep reflections for the National Police Service. It is also curious to note that in the country's many political contests, the bulk of the killings have been occasioned not by rival parties, but by the National Police Service. And the key word here is national. Utumishi kwa wote, our third and final red flag tonight.
Because of the extraordinary events of the past few days and the general political atmosphere of our country, our final word becomes our first word, and early. The news gang follows right after the news.